So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. And in this video, we want you to walk away with some useful ingredients, for lack of a better expression, to then throw into your session or your campaign to blow stuff up, make cool things happen. We're trying to make a useful video that no matter where you're at, no matter what game you're playing, sometimes you're prepping and you just need to know what's going to happen in the next session. And this hopefully is just some cool stuff you can insert to keep the ball moving down the field until you figure it out as a game master. So we're going to figure this out together, but at the end of it, you will have something you'll walk away from that you can use in your game. I promise you that. So what's next, guys? What do we want to do?
So I think we'll spend a lot of time speaking in very broad terms about certain things. And I wanted to say up front that in a lot of cases, it will seem like we are not addressing something that we should address. And we will generally get to it, especially if it's like about a specific faction or about a specific thing. We are probably going to name things like names that make sense logically to us, like the person that stole the thing, rather than figuring out their name and everything, right? We're going to use some of these tricks to speed up the brainstorming process so we can get the cool ideas out, and we can always name them later on our lunch break or something, you know? So yeah, I think one of the first steps is kind of deciding what some of the elements we want to make are, and maybe start putting together what the narrative is going to look like.
Yeah, so the sort of scenario that we came up with when we were kind of brainstorming this video out was something along the lines of there are two different factions, and those factions have some sort of conflict or disagreement about like who has ownership or rights to a certain resource, or which side was the wrongful party in a dispute or something like that. And both sides think the other side is wrong, and both sides try to convince the party to help them instead of the other guys. It was, I think, kind of a basic starting point that we had.
Yeah. And so now this is your opportunity. What's the resource? Well, it's whatever your players have encountered or maybe you've talked about before. It could be a magic item. It could be food. It could be land, whatever. But there's faction A and faction B. And my opinion is that you shouldn't make either of them necessarily outright bad or good. I think it's going to be a lot more interesting for your game if both can present a case they reasonably think is true. And then, James, why don't you speak a little bit to what you had mentioned, which is like whether or not it is true. What you had some thoughts on that I think are important to at least address, because we don't know yet.
Yeah, I think that's good. Exactly, yeah. So right now we're starting, really high up and kind of zooming in. There's a lot of ways to do this, but we've started with a very generic, there's two factions and they're fighting over something. But there are certain things we know have to be true about those. As Tim said, one of the things we want to be true is neither of them are inherently evil. If that doesn't match your game, if the players can point at one and go, well, they're wrong, clearly, it's not exactly what we're going for. It's against the spirit. You can do that in your game, but the other thing is we're going to come up with some stuff for the factions, but we may even come up with a few things, and you can choose. You'll realize that if you make the right things generic and put the right things in, it will all work itself out as long as you have the important pieces. To speak to specifically what Tim was saying, one of those pieces you need is there needs to sort of be a right answer. In this case, if it's a dispute, or rather there needs to be an unanswer, not actually a right answer. There's a dispute between two factions. There's a chance that either one of them is correct, that the record keeping was wrong on this side or the library burned on that side, or they're both wrong. It's something they've disputed over for years, and there's potentially no solving it because it really comes down to a religious issue. Both of those things are valid, but the idea is you as a game master just need to make sure you know what it is, because it will color so many of the other elements we're creating. And by doing that, we will be able to make everything more cohesive, because everything will kind of be pointing to what they eventually reveal as the real reason. You can't really foreshadow something if you don't know what it is yet, I guess is the deal. So, yeah, I think that's the main thing. So we would start, maybe looking at some of those different permutations we can come up with.
Yeah, so as James said, it can kind of really be anything. We'll just toss out a couple ideas that sort of come to our minds, free-form style, and kind of see where we ended up landing on on what this is going to be for us, but as Tim said earlier, you can mix and match anything from your game to fit into this scenario if you have something that works much better. So I guess like the first thing that comes to mind is like it could be like some sort of like territory dispute. Like that's always like easy. Well, easy. It's easy conflict because it's usually very messy and it's usually hard to prove definitively. In any case, like which side is definitely right and definitely wrong. So that's one way that we could start going down. The other thing that comes to mind is like some sort of like blood feud situation where both clans are sort of trying to get revenge on the other for some initial wrongdoing, and you sort of have to untangle what the truth of the situation was, and maybe both clans did something to the others. And so those are the two things that sort of came to mind immediately: some sort of territory dispute or some sort of like long running rivalry, or some sort of conflict like that.
Yeah, another one I thought could be cool for that was if something like something fell out of the sky, or if something came up from the ground like due to an earthquake, and it's in a spot that before was not worth anything to anybody, but now the dispute has been brought up fresh, So kind of like mixing that where it's like, oh, a new thing has entered and that causes the dispute because they didn't care before.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm bad about this stuff because it doesn't make sense, but then also it's kind of like, yeah, but I'm trying to play a game too, and I'm trying to... So the way I'm imagining this happening is like, it's literally going to be thrust on the players. So this maybe is too generic, but some sort of... It could be a roadside meeting at a literal crossroads where this side of the road or this side of the road, and maybe there are two emissaries with not full-blown armies. I don't think this would be a war, but like a retinue of soldiers. So it could get ugly. There could be a skirmish here. Blood could be shed easily, and maybe for whatever reason, it matters today. So both sides sent something. It's not an international incident yet. It's nothing like that. But the reason why I'm saying this is, at least for me, I used to take this kind of advice and then I would sort of try to like weave it in so that the players would discover it. And then I realized that I'm wasting like 2 hours and they're expecting this big payoff. And then they end up, and it's just, I could have started at the road. So crossroads, red side, blue side, both are standing there. They're having this sort of conversation about, no, it's this because of this. Then the players are there and they have to interact. They have to be a part of it, and it's thrust upon them, and there's not a lot of time to plan. So that's kind of what I was thinking. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I mean, yeah, I think that's a solid starting point. And I like the idea of it sort of being up to the players as far as like how they go about resolving this sort of thing. Because like you said, both sides are battle ready, but not in combat. So that gives a lot of freedom to the party to sort of approach in the manner that they see fit, which might be going up to the side that pays them more and helping them fight. This is the mercenary approach. Or maybe they do something a little bit more diplomatic where they, try to get testimony from both sides and figure out historical records or some kind of thing. Like any of those would be viable approaches, and the players get to pick rather than sort of preordaining as the GM of like, they're going to fight and you have to pick which side to fight with. It's like, no, here's the situation, do with it what you will, which for me is, I think, always the better way to approach planning these sorts of things. I kind of like taking a sort of like mix of kind of some of the ideas that maybe James had said earlier of like, these people are at this crossroads. It's like the territory here is like somewhat under dispute, it has been forever. But no one really cared because it's just the fringe parts of both sides. And then suddenly like a falling star of rare metal, like hits like, right, whatever it is, the specific resource or whatever could be anything. But suddenly the borders that were okay being fuzzy, now it really matters exactly where the line is. And both sides are going to have very strong cases as to why, no, this is actually in our land because we had this treaty back in there. It's, whatever it is from there.
Yeah, I love that. And so real quick, I was just going to say off of what you said, Jeff, you said one person says, you mentioned testimony and then you mentioned mercenary approach. And I think it's okay as the dungeon master to put that in the mouths of NPCs. Like, don't expect that your players are going to think of that stuff. You can even have one of the sides say, hey, listen, you know, we know that we're right. We're willing to pay you if you help us. Like, here's a little bit of evidence. And then the other side say, well, if you just listen to our testimony, you'll see that they're not right. And unfortunately, we don't have the money to pay you, but don't let that sway you. Like, put that on. Now they have to choose. And then I was thinking, I don't know if there was like a third option, but if they can also come up with a third option themselves. I say let's lock that in. I am all about just saying the precious metal fell from the sky. Like, boom. I would have said maybe like, oh, that seems a little cheesy, but that's actually what happened in with Tutankhamun. He had allegedly, I watched the series and on National Geographic, and his medal was made from his dagger was made from metal that wasn't from Earth. So they said, it must have been some sort of something that fell from the heavens. So yeah, boom, something awesome fell, whatever that is. I wouldn't even decide what that is fully. Maybe call it something mysterious, and that's what they're fighting over. I think it's cool.
Yeah, and I want to touch on a few things we've done and we haven't talked about. We have not decided a lot of things. Like, you hear the three of us talking. We have not decided what tech level this is, what world this is in. Any conversation we've had about this, you've basically seen. I would say that because Tim mentioned emissaries, right? I wasn't imagining emissaries. I was imagining something very different. For these purposes, it does not matter, because the moment one of us mentions something that it needs to be specific enough, the rest of us will sort of update what we need to, right? So we don't get caught up on that. I don't go, wait, emissaries, what are you talking about? Are you imagining this? That doesn't matter. And so we've been doing that very well, and I just wanted to point that out. Another thing is that thing you mentioned, this meteorite, that's a very good example of this bracketed thing that we're going to genericize. In your game, it could be an airship that crashed on a moon. The things you need are two people that think that part of the moon belongs to them, right? And you'll be able to use most of the parts we come up with here. Yeah, I just wanted to say those things. I did have kind of a crazy idea. This is very specific, but you can come up with your own. But I have this idea of what the solution is, or why there's a dispute. The thing is, imagine, you said, Tim, put it right in the mouths of the NPCs. I'm imagining the sort of thing, right, in my game, what I would do is I would probably have an argument break out near the players, right? It's up to them to go see what's going on and talk to the people or not. When they speak to somebody, they might say something as obvious as, yeah, these darn faction Ayers, if they only could see the map that was lost in the whatever, then they'd... Well, immediately I'm like, well, they could go find that map, right? So I'm imagining both sides have some reason, and they claim there are different maps show different things, but it's a thing where the river moves over time. Where depending on the flow up here, the river, like literally, if it's on either side of a river, if they're going, no, we own everything west of this river, they go, yeah, but the river now snakes way around because of something that we don't understand, So I see something like that as like, they find maps that are they just don't match. They're like, yeah, this says it's here and this says it's here. And then they got to go talk to some guy or a person, somebody that knows what the deal is. And then they go, oh, that's it. And then you have to maybe find a compromise. But that's the sort of thing I mean when I'm like, you just need to know that as the GM, and you get to slowly lead them there if you wanted to go with something like that.
Yeah, and can I just say, by doing that, by having that idea in your head of what it really is, it gives you this trickle-down effect so that you can confidently answer questions in a mischievous way because you know. So if they go, well, was it X or Y? And you can go, it seems like it was both. And you're not just like in one of our previous videos, you're not just writing these checks that you have to cash. You're just slowly giving information. And don't be afraid, by the way, just quick insert this here. Everything doesn't have to be a mystery. And as a GM, I used to think everything had to be a mystery. It doesn't. If they figure it out right then in that meeting, that's fine. That was the point of the game, was for them to play and figure that out. They still have to figure out how they're going to proceed with that information. So that's the game. But yeah, I think that's a pretty neat little scenario we've built.
Yeah, and that's always the fun part about RPGs, and one of the stressful parts about being a game master is, the players will always have their clever little tricks that they'll bring in, and sometimes that might mean they figure it out really quickly or really easily. Like, one of them casts detect thoughts on the guy, and he sees in his mind that he knows he's lying, whatever it is, and then you know right away. Like, it's okay just to let them have that moment, and they got to have a fun little encounter. They got to use one of their fun powers to solve the encounter, and then you can proceed onwards. I know it kind of feels like a waste of a good scenario when they bypass it in the first 5 minutes or whatever, but that's part of the fun. And part of the challenge, I think, of trying to run these sorts of things. But yeah, I think that's a super good starting point for a scenario that you can modularly take apart and put back together in whatever way your world would best see it fit.
And because we really didn't talk a lot about many of the specifics, it should be broad enough that you can take the concepts and use them yourself. And if you're wondering, like, well, okay, what are the next steps? What should I do next? Well, we listed a lot of things we needed. You would then need those people, right? If there's an NPC you talk to on each faction, well, you clearly need to prep them. They're going to talk to them, right? It's almost like if you take a scenario and write it out in this fashion, you can see all the pieces you need to make. Obviously, there may be other things you need to prep, other stuff, but you can be confident that when the players do ask a question, you probably have the answer because you prepped what the answer is, and it should make you feel more confident, I think, in general when you're playing or game mastering, hopefully.
Yeah, and this should give you, we filled in some rough outlines, and now you can start coloring them in. So your prep isn't, oh gosh, what the heck am I going to think? You're not having to think of what's going on. All you have to do is decide the details for your game. Like James said, it's a different kind of prep for me when I'm like, oh, what's a quirky NPC that I can make this person, and then one named guard on each side, and then maybe a cool descriptor or an interesting landmark. That's fun. I don't have to think of the hard stuff, like what's the conflict and why are they fighting? So hopefully you'll do that. And so we're Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, and of course, tabletop games. Comment below what time period or setting or era you would use that in. I'm super curious to see, and any other details you want to share would be a lot of fun. If you like this kind of video, then consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell for whenever we post videos like this. But as always, we end things with a Tabtarian toast.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Sláinte. When everything's a mystery in an RPG, the players are so confused, and I don't know why I thought that's how I should do it, but everything was like, you don't know, and they were just like, I don't, like, what? It felt like the ending to a Scooby-Doo without an episode that preceded it. It was the worst. I don't know why I thought that secrets were what. I just stopped. I just kind of like, unless it's a big mystery, I just tell people everything, and it's way more fun.